Boom. What's up? This is Ron with HYPERSPEED Radio, episode 4. This is RonHammett with me today. We got Ron Squared running. Today we're talking about the introduction to running. One thing I wanted to say today is I'm super excited for today because it's our real first meaty podcast where we got some actual knowledge bombs being dropped today. Tired of the introductions, but they had to be done. Laid down the foundation. Little bit of business. Last time we forgot to mention Sundog Running. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that RonHammett is a Sundog Running ultra marathon coach. And for some reason we let that slide last time.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Now I can leave.
Okay, nice talking to you, Ron.
See ya.
Anyway, so what I asked Ron to do, and I did the same, is prepare under 5 minutes what I do for somebody who's being introduced to running. And Ron prepared 5 minutes of what he would do for someone's introduction to ultra, which we're going to define ultra in this case as anything more than a marathon. 50K and up, essentially. So I'll go first. I'm going to do my 5 minutes like a story. I get a phone call one day because I answer my own phone here at work. I get a phone call from this guy. His name is Eric. Eric says, my entire life I wanted to run. I've tried countless times. Every time I get 1, 2, 3 miles in, my shins, my knees, my hips, they all hurt. And I'm wondering if you can help. Well, I said, let's start with an evaluation. Let's get to the bottom of it. I ended up doing a gait evaluation, and this guy has a training age of 0 in any sports. He's not exactly thin or skinny. He's not overweight or big. He's just one of these guys who's never had any athletic endeavors in his life. And every time he tries to run, he just doesn't have the range of motion, strength, or processing to understand how this running game is supposed to go. So did an evaluation, did a gait evaluation. He's got a funky run. Not going to lie, he had a funky run. But he had more glaring range of motion and strength abnormalities than that. And I wondered if maybe addressing some of those things would just clean up his run anyway. So I said, I don't want you to run a single mile until we do 3 weeks of strength training and squats, lots of hip stability. And we ended up discharging him after 3 weeks with a bit of a skeleton program and lots of strength training. And he was running pain-free at the time, so let him go. About 6 months later, he calls me up and says, I need to make an appointment. When he comes to his appointment, he says, do you think I can run a marathon? I am addicted to running, and I'm loving every minute of it, and I feel like I could step up to marathon. I'm from Minnesota, and Grandma's Marathon is a really, really big deal to me. Let's step up your strength training. He had a history of lower back pain, so we introduced some deadlift, continued to tweak his squat, get his hips and his back just really, really strong. And he ended up running Grandma's Marathon about 10 minutes off of Boston qualifying pace. And he looks at me and he says, do you think I can qualify for Boston? I said, well, let's put a real plan together. Let's work on pacing. We didn't even talk about pacing. We didn't talk about nutrition. We didn't talk about an advanced strength program. We just did the minimum to keep him healthy. So he signed up for 3 marathons. He stepped up his strength training. He stepped up his mileage. Really took to a pacing strategy. And the first marathon, we thought, let's just have a hard effort. Let's see if we can put miles 20 to 26 in a decent pace and just see what happens. Qualifies for Boston by more than 4 minutes. So he dropped 15 minutes off of that first marathon. And we thought we would make a Boston Marathon push for the second or third in the year. Did it in the first one. Ultimately, by accident, when he got to 20, he just decided he was going to go and decided to push. So now he's 2 Boston Marathons in, probably 10, 15 marathons by now. And every time I see his social media, he's just an absolute machine. The dude is killing it. Not to mention, he's just a super happier person. He's dropped like 20 pounds and just has this swag about him because he just loves that he can bust out a super fast marathon. And, you know, I think that is a perfect story on what I would do is identify impairments, correct those impairments using strengthening, and then put together a basic to moderate running program and essentially introduce them to the ground reaction force for running that way. And happy to say that I have many stories like that, but Eric's story comes to mind. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ron. Ron's got his story or his 5 minutes on what he thinks it takes to go from marathon and move up to something more in an ultra distance.
And actually, to play off on your story, that was my story. I mean, that is my, almost to a T, where I started, you know, I want to do a marathon before you die kind of thing.
You mean if I change the word Eric for Ron, yeah, that's essentially your story? Did you run Boston?
No. But this is like, what is it, 2004, so 16 years ago or more, got the idea, I want to do a marathon. You pull up you go to the internet and you download the beginner marathon plan, which has you run 2 miles the first day, which is insane. Within a month, I was shin problems, knee problems, 0 strength training. You know, fast forward. So I just kind of hobbled through the training of marathon and kind of crossed the line. And one of the questions for you was, in his first marathon, what was his recovery like? How did that week after the marathon feel?
Well, at the time I was prescribing a week completely off after a road marathon. And he texted me about 5 days in and said, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure I have to take 7 days?" One thing to Eric's credit is he pokes into the clinic when something starts. So, you know, he's missed 1 or 2 runs because of posterior tib or some kind of, you know, tendon problem, and he pokes into the clinic and he gets it addressed right away. So in the 2.5 years I've been working with him off and on, he's had a handful of little nicky-knack things, but he's not been injured.
Yeah, and I remember post my first marathon, it was a kind of a downhill-ish marathon. I was destroyed. That next week, I was just the sorest I've ever been. But again, I've never strength trained.
Yeah,
so
he wanted to run in 5 days. He was like,
oh yeah, I was not even close. Navigating stairs was a problem. But fast forward, the solution to that was strength training. So, and especially as you get into longer distances, that became more and more important. So my story is not really a story, but it kind of dovetails into yours, where if I get a runner, I'm assuming they've done, at least in training or in events, half marathon or marathons, right? And it obviously always depends, you know, the famous word depends on your goal, depends on where you're at. So say you want to do for instance, 100-miler. So I have the same philosophy. Can you go get evaluated by a proper PT that does gait analysis and will do some sort of strength analysis and see where you're at. So in order to get to where you want to be, you need to know where you're at. So with that analysis, usually if there's any deficits, they can be solved by strength training, right? So same principle as a new athlete. Most runners haven't really taken on strength training in their regular, in their regular workouts. So kind of moving up into the longer distances, strength training becomes as important, right? Even more. It might take different forms, but it is really, really advantageous for the runner to adopt a good strength training plan. So theoretically, I would love for a runner to come in, get evaluated, spend the next few 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on where they're at, really adopting a strength training plan, building up to a point where they can do 1 to 2 heavy sessions a week, and consistency. So consistency through strength training as you build up your, you can go through all the benefits of strength training as far as tissue development, muscle development, bone density, all that good stuff. It's all good prep for running volume that will come. And meanwhile, a consistent, for me, and that's the hardest thing to get athletes to do, is a low volume running plan. As the strength takes on, you can slowly build the volume, but I emphasize strength over running, again, depending on the athlete, way more than just volume. And that is so hard, I think, for athletes to kind of like, I want to run. I have a 50 miler in 6 months. I need to get out there and, do 40 miles a week, 60 miles a week. But with the idea of, with the strength training, you will get there and you get there healthy. You're going to get on the start line feeling good. And once you're done with that race, you're not going to be destroyed. So I think with your story, that's the classic. I mean, it's from nothing to something. But even in the longer distances, and I was my own story of that was, I've been told by 2 surgeons I'll never run again because I've had knee problems, plagued with shin problems, and all that was wrong was just muscle imbalances or muscle weaknesses. I wasn't able to take the load and the volume for the amount of distances I was running. So that's kind of my story and how important I found that strength is to ultra running.
Interesting, because we did this today and we've had discussions, but we never really had this conversation.
Yeah, when you're talking like, that is my story. We've never talked about this before.
Yeah,
the shit problem was like with
we purposely left the chemistry of this conversation to the podcast. So I think it's pretty cool. Now when you say depends, can you talk to me about, let's say runner A has run 5 trail half marathons, 1 or 2 trail marathons versus, this is my 5th 100 miler, but I'm trying to say, run fast at,
Sub 24s and have some.
Yeah. So, sort of a beginner versus a more experienced. And when you say depends, how are you going to coach them different?
So, I have a rough rule just because it follows a numeric sequence. Like, say a person wants to run a 100 miler. I always say it's like a 3-2-1 rule. Again, assuming they've run trail marathons, have done a significant amount of training, 3-2-1, like they need to do at least, and this is at least 3 50Ks, 2 50 milers, and 100K. I would love to see those accomplished before tackling a 100 miler. But it depends on the athlete. If they're strong and they can take on more training, that's where it will change. To me, that's almost minimum, because it's hard to train at long distances. You're not going to know how your gut feels at mile, 50 when you're doing only, your longest run is 20 miles or 25 miles. So
Right.
you need to experience time on feet and how your body changes and how your mind plays tricks on you and, goes down some dark holes.
You should patent that.
What's that?
3-2-1 rule.
Yeah, but it changes. So it always changes but if you're a 50-mile goal, how many races have you done? What's your training like? So it all depends on where you're coming from. So it's really back to assess where that athlete is and setting to people like you to get evaluated. That's huge, because it instead of throwing 15 exercises at them, strength, shotgun approach, they can narrow it down to, oh, it's this particular issue. Let's really, let's really focus on that. So it's just more efficient.
Yeah, because the thing that I think about is, can a person do it without these strategies? Absolutely. But we're going to save you time. We're going to save you energy. We're going to, the finish your first A race and not be destroyed is such a big feather in your cap, because now you're willing to train more. You're willing to look at that effort and say, what can I do better? It's like you never listen to the person after their first A race the day of, oh, fuck, I'll never do that again. But then a week later, they're like, well, I didn't pace myself. The day before I could have slept more. My nutrition could have changed. I should have attacked that hill, or I should have backed off of that hill, or, I should have went with so-and-so, or, whatever. There's all these things that we critique in the week after the race that, instead of being injured and miserable and, regretting that decision to do that, you're figuring out what you can do next time. And to me, that's the funnest part, is like, listen, they come back and listen to the war stories and like, what can I do different?
Yeah, well, with a good strength base, you can really develop from there. But if you're constantly dealing with injury, right? It's frustrating and depressing, and you go back and forth. You'll be off for a few weeks, or you're not training where you should be. Besides all the benefit it makes you more efficient as you run, especially run long distances. There's a bunch of benefits. So, but for that new runner, and again, back to it's so hard for them to swallow. Is like, you need to spend your life strength training, right? Just as a person, but initially strength over running. And as you get stronger and as you can handle more, heavier loads, then the volume of your weekly runs can come up. The type of workouts that we can give them during that week can change, because their body will be more adapt to take those stresses and loads, and the probability of injury is not zero, but it'll definitely lessen considerably.
Yeah, the size of the injuries are less when you have the connective tissue properties to do it well.
Yeah, and probably you probably see it more than I do, the recovery. So if a strong athlete comes in with a injury opposed to a that the recovery time is going to be dramatically faster.
Yep.
Okay.
And if I can get some of these runners to buy into a 7 to 10 day rule, where if this calf or this knee or this hip's bothering you for 7 to 10 days, that's when we get in, then the recovery time's even shorter, maybe like 1 to 3 visits. And, the problem, I think, is there's a lot of health practitioners out there that will latch onto somebody and then rope them into 4 to 6 more weeks worth of work. Well, I'm trying to get these runners back, plug in whatever the detail is, get them 1 to 3 visits, and then send them back. So, if we're doing things the right way, the maintenance work is very, very minimal.
Yeah. And I think for new athletes or new to the ultra running distance, I think I found it's easier to have them adopt strength training, especially if they're busy. So everybody's busy, but they have families, they have children, they have jobs. If I can say, you can do workouts at home, gain strength, and run less. if they like that, I mean, what I've found, at least anecdotally, is with heavy strength training, I was able to, half my volume and perform at the same speed. You're not, you're podium finishing, but you're finishing at the same what you did before on races, and you're not destroyed after, and you have a happy, spouse, and you have kids, and you kept your job. Right. So a lot of that, it just becomes more efficient at scheduling your time. Again, if you want to be faster and volume, there's no escaping volume, but if you want to become faster and you have to adopt volume, you're going to have a strong base. So kind of completing that circle.
Yeah, it's still crazy to me, as much time as we spent together, how completely independent tracks ended up super parallel. Because I can't say that any better.
Well, I spent 10 years fumbling through, injury after injury, or just experimenting. I like experimenting and trying things out.
Yeah, you do like that.
So, and then the internet and Facebook groups and running groups came into play. Then you start really sharing stories, but then finding a network of people where, finding a good PT is super hard. There's only 2 or 3 that I know that are run centric. They're athlete based. They're not just car accident. We're kind of, take 6 to 8 weeks. Yeah. So yeah, it's a little trial and error, but it works.
So so how about this? Give me 3 concrete takeaways of what a person needs to do in order to go from a base of marathon-ish type running to ultra.
3 takeaways. Again, if resources and time were infinite, find a person to do a good evaluation, right? Good evaluation and strength evaluation. Normally, I tell people it's like almost the cost of a pair of running shoes, right? A good pair of running shoes. It's around there, right? So we all have too many shoes, so you could spare one. You could invest that money into something that's going to change the way you run for, it can have a huge impact in how you run and train. So I think that's the biggest takeaway. And thinking off the fly would be allowing, so if you do find that you're weak or you have deficiencies, really take the time and on the sacrifice of running, take the time, and it could be weeks or months, to get a good base of strength. You need that before you start applying volume to it. And I think people they feel good, 2 weeks later, and then okay, I'm going to go for a huge, long run. And you might not feel it right away, but it's creeping. It's right under the surface. And so really sacrificing ego or time running to develop that base. And that goes with like throwing social media out the window and Strava and, swallowing your ego for a little bit. You can run, and in those,
I signed up for another race.
I'm guilty of that. But even during that time, running every run, most of your runs slowly and easy. Where when you go back to Strava and you look at it, you're like, oh, I could have done better. But just taking the time. That's where during this COVID time, I think some people have taken advantage of that. They've taken the time to do consistent running without huge races. And they're seeing this 8 or 9 or 10 month consistent running and doing some good fundamental work. And now when the races are starting to open, they're seeing their ability has really blossomed. So before, they would have been signed up for races every month or 2 and going into that cycle and never really kind of getting that consistent base. So that's a big one. So, and then consistency. I think it's consistency with strength training and it's consistency with running. You need months for the longer distances. Again, depends on where you're coming from. I tell people, so people ask me like, how do you run a 100 miler? And these are, say, non-runners. And the first question is, do you want to run it? Is it a fire in your belly? And they go, no. Okay, well, you're out. It's not for you.
Right.
Because you need to be able to.
Because you won't, when push comes to shove, you won't want to push.
No, it's a lot of suffering. And it's going to take 2 years. We'll say, just to put a number out there, it's going to take a half a year just in strength, just if, depending on your, again, depends on what your foundation is, but developing all the strength training you need, and then just running for 18 months. I mean, you need to have a consistent every other day, 5 days a week, or whatever your plan is. But you can't, it's like I tell people, it's like studying for a math test. You can't cram. You need to slowly absorb.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, so it's kind of so it's for the people who want it right away. Maybe that's a half marathon or marathon, but if you can foresee, like, in 2 years, I want to go from a half marathon or marathon and really put the work in and achieve that goal. It's a long-term goal, which, ironically is what our sport is, but it's hard for people to swallow. And that's why I think it's a subset of our populace that can kind of do this kind of stuff, that have the mental fortitude and the patience. And maybe that's why that most of the 100-mile runners are over 40. There's a huge percentage of them are 40 and beyond, because they have that patience and that
a little more mature.
Yeah.
My takeaways would be depending on where you're starting in your athletic life, if you're an experienced athlete, you might need a gait evaluation to be able to consistently put one foot in front of the other, but definitely at least a strength evaluation, range of motion testing, identify any impairments and get to them quickly so that you can get on to enjoying yourself. And then not putting too many miles too soon. I think a lot of people try to latch onto this running group or, jump on this, like you said, 2 miles in the first week of this marathon training plan you got off the internet. So properly managing a volume of running and then managing tempo and volume at the same time. I see too many people trying to change tempo and volume at the same time. And then while I think 90% of running performance is the body and the process of running, there is this very small equipment part to it. So, properly being fit into shoes. And this is maybe a topic for another podcast, but because I don't believe that shoe stores are doing a great job of that, but, having some proper footwear and maybe taking that question to your practitioner, what type of footwear should I be using, and have a discussion about footwear, because, like I said, the shoe stores aren't doing a great job of it. But there is a small component to this running thing. That's your equipment. It's properly running a good amount of volume and then identifying any impairments. So those are my takeaways.
I'm going to add one more then to yours then. I think every runner needs to become their own kind of advocate, their own doctor, their own scientist. They need to be able to go to different PTs or read different things and start, or talking to people and start applying it to themselves. They need to become their own source of information and become an expert at what they do. And it's to the shoe thing. It's like it took years. You have to find, and then they change it. Of course, you find a good shoe, and then the next year it's a different model.
And your body changes.
Totally. Oh yeah.
So your needs as a runner change.
Yeah. So you need to become your own expert at these things and slowly do the research and become a professional.
That's a good one. Maybe we should do an entire podcast on resources, where I bring 5 resources and you bring 5 resources, and we just talk about why these resources really helped us. And maybe the listener can walk away with 10 resources they didn't have.
True. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea, because a lot of it was, it's a piece here, it's a piece there.
Yeah.
And then that puzzle starts to fill in.
Right. I mean,
if you're not a puzzle person, then
I've been treating runners predominantly for 10 years now, and, you know, thought processes change. You know, the things I was doing 10 years ago, I'm not doing now. And, you know, having this strength equipment behind me, I didn't have 10 years ago. And, you know, so there's a lot to it. Okay, last thing. Last time I think you mentioned it was
Is this music?
yes, it was High School Musical.
Oh yeah. Oh please.
Are you still on that?
No. I've gone a totally different direction. Now I'm on Five Finger Death Punch.
Five Finger Death Punch.
Yeah.
That's quite the.
Yeah, you got it's a palate cleanser.
Palate cleanser. Right on. I have circled back to old school hip hop, and this morning I was blasting some Atmosphere. You know, they've got I think their first album was like 25 years ago. So if you like some underground old school hip hop from Minnesota, look up some Atmosphere. Their early stuff is much better than their newer stuff, but Atmosphere. All right, let's wrap it up. Episode 4, Ron Squared Running. Today we talked about the introduction to running and or ultra distance. I'd like to thank my man, RonHammett, Sundog coach, and do a little, oh, well, we don't have video here, but you can circle your shirt back there. I see also the hat we didn't mention. So the shirt to the shoot to your left, and then there's a hat to your right.
How'd I get there?
That's all right. Thanks for talking to me, man. Great information today. And we'll talk to you soon.